Yate Bene. Good morning, my relatives. This is Mark Charles, and today is Monday, November 7th, and I am sitting down with my second cup of coffee. And today I want to have a conversation about the fact that it's 2022, and in the United States of America, slavery is still on the ballot in our country. And we need to talk about that as we go into the midterm election of 2022. And I'm very excited to have two guests with me from the podcast Abolition Today, um, Max and Yusuf. And I'm so grateful that they could be with me and have this conversation with me today. But before we begin that, let me do as I always do, which is acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from what's now called Washington, D.C. And these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the lands where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So before we go any further, we have the midterm elections coming up. And I want to bring on my two guests. I want to bring on Max and I want to bring on Yusuf. And they are from a podcast that I've been a guest on a few times over the past few years, and they are working very hard to bring the issue of enslavement, or not only our history of enslavement, but the fact that slavery is still legal in the United States, right? If you read the Constitution, the 13th Amendment makes an exception that codifies and constitutionally protects slavery under the jurisdiction of our criminal justice system. And not only is that clause in the 13th Amendment, but that same clause, or one very similar to it, is in many state constitutions around the country. And so they highlighted to me just a few days ago that they're really working hard going into the midterm elections to make sure that everyone is aware about the 5 states where this issue is on the ballot. And I said, well, why don't we do a second cup of coffee together? So I'm excited. I'm thrilled to have Max and Yusuf with me today. Thank you both so much for joining me. If you would please just both introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll jump into this conversation.
Sure, absolutely. First, I want to say thank you. I made the call saying we need some help to spread the word, and you answered the call. So thank you so much for that. I am Max Parthas. I'm the National Campaign Coordinator for the Abolish Slavery National Network. I'm also the Acting Director for the Paul Cuffey Abolitionist Center and co-host of, as you mentioned earlier, Abolition Today, a podcast on modern-day slavery and human trafficking as it is allowed by the 13th Amendment and practiced by for-profit prisons worldwide. Yusuf?
Yes. Thank you, Mark, for having us on. Really appreciative of it, because anytime we reached out to you for you to come on to our program, you've definitely, answered the call. So we really appreciate that. We appreciate the opportunity to come on to speak about what's currently on the ballots now. Uh, I'm one of the founding members of the Abolish Slavery National Network, and I'm also the co-host of Abolition Today. Uh, so let's get the conversation started.
Yeah, well, let me start by sharing into the chat, into the comments, one of the articles that is being run. And there's been several similar articles. I saw one that ran in the AP a few weeks ago, and this one was in the BBC. It's titled U.S. Midterm Elections, Why 5 States Have Slavery on the Ballot in 2022. And I encourage people to read this article. I read through it earlier today. And it does several things. It highlights how slavery was never abolished in the United States, and there are several states where it's legal in the Constitution. The interesting thing about this article is it never mentions the 13th Amendment, right? It doesn't talk about, it talks about the states where this is being discussed, but it doesn't talk about even the broader issue, which is we have a national constitution, the Constitution of the United States of America, where slavery is still legalized. It's still constitutionally protected. And while removing it from the states is a giant step in the right direction, we also need to address it at a national level. And so I encourage people to read through this article. There's one comment I wanted to highlight. Well, we'll talk about that a little later, but maybe Yusuf, if you could just highlight the 5 states where this issue is on the ballot this year.
Sure. So I've created my own acronym to help me remember the 5 states, and I call it VOLTA. So that's Vermont, Oregon, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Alabama. In Vermont, it's Proposition 2. In Alabama, it's what
Amendment
is it?
7.
Amendment 7. In Louisiana, it's number.
No,
I'm
no,
sorry,
actually,
Louisiana
Alabama.
is 7.
Yeah,
Alabama is number 10.
right.
Then we have one is Measure 112, and Tennessee is Amendment 3. So those are the 5 states that are on the ballot. But Max will give more details. There's 2 states where there's like special circumstances that have to occur in order for you to even be able to vote on these measures.
So I'm curious if you could just maybe let us know, either Max or Yusuf, whoever is more familiar with this, is this removing the clause from this law? Is it just removing the entire statement altogether? Like what is actually on the ballot in each of these states?
In each of the states is basically the same thing. It's removing the offensive pro-slavery language and replacing it with slavery and involuntary servitude shall be prohibited, period.
Period.
So no exceptions at all. There's a couple of states that do have some subsections that we've had to incorporate in order to get these bills to where they're at now. So for instance, in Louisiana, it says in subsection 2, just like it says in Utah, does not affect the otherwise lawful administration of the criminal justice system. So judges still got to judge, prison guards still got to guard, police still got to police, all those things still going on. But because it says slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited, period, those things are now unlawful and not included in the otherwise lawful administration.
Okay. Wow. And you said there were 2 states where it wasn't just a matter of voting; they have to address it somehow specifically, right?
Yes, Tennessee and Alabama would be those 2. Tennessee, you have to vote for governor. So apparently that's a thing that's been going on for Tennessee for quite some time. So if you go to vote yes on Amendment 3 in Tennessee, you also have to vote for governor. If you don't vote for governor, your vote for the Abolition Amendment will now not count. And it doesn't matter who you vote for. You can write in Mark Charles if you want to, governor of Tennessee, and
Yeah.
that'll be perfectly fine as long as you put something there. And the other one is Alabama. Excuse me. Because of the way we managed to get this done in Alabama, it caused a little bit of confusion. So what they're doing is in Alabama is rewriting the whole Constitution. It's the largest Constitution on earth, over 5,000 pages or something like that.
Really?
And yes,
Oh, yeah.
and Section 32 has the same exception as the other states have. So that's part of the racist language that was approved to be taken out. So what you have to do in Alabama is vote to ratify the 2022 Constitution. And then you got to scroll down a little further and vote yes on Amendment 10. So those are the 2 that are a little confusing. And the problem child that we have is Louisiana, because in Louisiana there is organized opposition to ending slavery. And we already know why. Louisiana is one of 2 states that I'm aware of that sentence people to hard labor. So everybody who's charged with a felony is sentenced to hard labor. So that's Arkansas and Louisiana that does that. And they're very much afraid of losing that free labor and the idea that all the people who have been sentenced to hard labor can now challenge it because it will be unconstitutional.
Yeah, so let me actually highlight this because this is in the article that we're looking at. So let me highlight this here. If you look at this article in the BBC, and one of the headings is "I worked for 25 years and came home with $124," and it briefly mentioned someone who was imprisoned, and it said now some imprisoned Black Americans are forced to pick cotton and other crops in southern plantations with their forefathers, where their forefathers were kept in chains. The United States of America has never had a day without codified slavery, says Curtis Bell Davis, Curtis Ray Davis II, who spent over 25 years serving hard labor in a Louisiana prison for murder that he did not commit before he was pardoned in 2019. And so, yeah, so that just kind of speaks to the point you were bringing up about Louisiana. One of the oppositions to it is it sounds like there's the experience of people serving hard labor, doing hard labor in the state. And that's legalized by this amendment, or by this clause that's in the amendments there. So I'm curious to hear. I know the two of you have been working very hard to kind of raise awareness about this on the national level, right? And to really bring things on a national level. I'd love to hear just what have been some of the challenges you faced, but what have been some of the encouraging things that you've seen happen in the last couple of years?
Yusuf, would you like to share something first?
Sure. So the first thing is just realizing how many people don't know about the exception clause. A poll was done maybe 2 years ago or so where it said 86% of people were unaware of the exception clause. So that's that huge curve that we had to overcome. We're just educating the people. And this is, you see the states where they have like a section 2 where it says this doesn't stop the lawful administration of justice. It's because a lot of times when something is going to be done within the quote unquote criminal justice system, many people think to the extremes. Like we think back to when they were going to be releasing people for, or things like that. People will automatically think, oh, are they going to be releasing all the murderers and rapists? Like they go to the extreme idea. So there will be some people who would think, okay, this remove means that you're just going to let everybody in prison out. And so that's why, you would see something saying this doesn't stop the lawful administration. So we have those to overcome. Now, the things that I'm just so thrilled about is just the fact we're here. This is where we are. We have 5 states on the ballot. Like many people may look back to 2018 when Colorado was able to get theirs passed, and they can say, oh, maybe that was a fluke, but they had to go 2 times, and then we go to Nebraska and Utah, and we were able to do it again. And here we are going a 3rd time to the ballots. And now each time we're increasing, the awareness increasing. So I'm just super thrilled about that this is moving forward. We're our ancestors' wildest dreams, because this is the wish they could have done back then. But we know just even trying to establish being able to vote cost many of them their lives, bloodshed, burned homes, all of these things. So I'm just super thrilled about being there.
Another thing I want to highlight here, thank you for sharing that, Yusuf, is, again, looking at the 5 states where it's on the ballot. And again, most Americans will think, well, in the South, this is the problem. This is probably where all this is going on. And certainly we have the stories about the hard labor in Louisiana. Most people aren't surprised if this is in Alabama and Tennessee. But we also have Oregon and Vermont on here, which are generally seen as fairly liberal states. And I think most people would be surprised if I remember correctly, Vermont was actually the last state to make chattel slavery illegal, if I remember correctly. And what I find fascinating, right, is we don't hear this in our in our national election dialogue. We don't hear us talking about these things. We end up kind of dismissing all that, and then we try to blame all this if this is just on the South. But again, this is a bipartisan value that has been used by both conservatives and liberals throughout our nation's history to keep this order in place.
With those 2 states that you mentioned, they are also unique too. Vermont was actually the very first state to introduce an exception clause to slavery. There's no other state that had done that before. And not only did they introduce 1, they introduced 3 exception clauses. So, of course, as a punishment for crime, Also, if you're under the age of 18 for men or for women, and 21 for men, and then finally as a punishment for debts and the like, whatever the like means. They instituted that exception clause in their 1777 Constitution. So they literally started all of this. They are the grandfather of exception clauses. But they like to tell the world that they were the first ones to abolish slavery, when the opposite is actually true. They codified it and showed how and described the conditions under which a person can become property. And they're also on the ballot this year to do that after 245 years. Once they did that, other states began adopting it even before the 13th Amendment. So states like Ohio, Alabama, Nevada all had exception clauses adopted from what Vermont had done prior to Lincoln's inclusion of the exception into the 13th Amendment. And then Oregon was, of course, people may not notice, but they were supposed to be the white utopia. It was supposed to be a paradise for white people. And if you were black, and in Oregon, there were laws that said if you didn't leave within a certain amount of time, you would get like 90 lashes until you finally left. And even right now, they face a lot of racism over there. It's a very small black population and indigenous population in Oregon. If you remember during the Halloween events, that's where you saw the people dressed up in blackface and prisoner garbs out there, dressed up as Nazis. That was in Oregon in 2022.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they might seem liberal, but they certainly have issues, and they are certainly exercising that exception clause for legalized slavery. In Vermont, just one more thing, even in Vermont, they're using human trafficking, where they're shipping people from their state to other states in for-profit private prisons where they have never committed a crime.
Yeah, this is the deeper you wade into this, I shouldn't be laughing, but it's just sometimes the absurdity just kind of gets to you.
Right.
You know,
Absurdity.
I need to correct. I said earlier, I think Vermont was the last state to abolish slavery, but that was incorrect. I was not accurate on that. I was thinking of another state.
New Jersey was the last one.
I was going to say I need to correct myself with New Jersey, not Vermont.
Yeah, the up south.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'm sure you've had to address this as well, but really to help people understand, this is not simply a partisan problem. This is not simply something that we can blame on one party or the other, or even one leader or the other. This is something we have to learn how to address, and we do need to address it as a nation. And even to highlight that, again, if I go back to this article that was shared on the BBC, one of the quotes that caught my eye was California actually had it on their ballot a few years ago, and one of the quotes in here is that it didn't pass because Governor Newsom and other legislators raised the concern that abolishing slavery and paying incarcerated people a minimum wage would cost $1.5 billion a year. And that turned this state away from making this change.
That was one of the things. Yes. Go ahead, Yusuf.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to clarify a little bit, it wasn't that it was on the actual ballot. It was that it was up for a vote for it to be put onto the ballot. And it was never actually taken to vote. Like, they deliberately let the time run out to where it wouldn't make it on. But that, what you read there, was put out, what was it, maybe about a week or so, Max, right before they were set to do that.
Yeah, it happened back in June of this year. June 30th, I believe, and it was the same exact day that the leaked information of Roe versus Wade came out. So under the cover of this confusion, they pulled out these documents. The only investigation that the Department of Finance had done out of all the bills that they had, and said, as you pointed out, that it would cost the state $1.5 billion if they were to pay inmates. But that wasn't part of our bill. Our bill said nothing about paying inmates. It was about removing this language. So they had already confused it. And then on top of that, they had just announced, Governor Newsom that they had $100 billion surplus in California. So to be saying, we've got $100 billion extra dollars on one side, and on the other side saying, but we can't afford to pay these slaves $1.5 billion was pretty ridiculous. And to use the cover of the Roe v. Wade decision to be able to do what they did to us, literally not allow roll call when we had enough people to vote yes for it in committee, to drag it out to the last possible minute so that it was finally too late, that was underhanded and immoral and unethical, to say the least. But that's how they defeated us in California. When we started this year in 2021, we had 15 states that had legislation. Only 5 made it to the ballot.
Yeah. So where does your work go after this election? Like, what are there other states you're trying to? It's not on the ballot yet, but it needs to be. Are there other states where you're trying to raise the awareness here? Like, what is your goals beyond these 5 states where a vote is being cast tomorrow?
Well, we have a big batch of states that are coming in. As many as 24 are already prepared. We have about 6 that already have their legislation in play for 2023. But there's going to be close to 24 states that are doing this next year. And of course, we also have a joint resolution on the table to to repeal and replace the 13th Amendment with a potential 28th Amendment that will have no exception, including as a punishment for crime. So next year is going to be much bigger than it was this year. If you think we've been kicking butt and taking names now, where do you see next year? Right. And if we win all 5 of these states, which we hope that we will, that's going to be rocket fuel for the next generation coming through. So next year it's going to be huge. Florida's already got their resolution put in. They don't even have to vote on it. They just have to get it through the Senate. The Senate has to vote on it in 2023. Nevada's already got their legislation in. Again, it goes right to the ballot in 2023. They've already been through all the committees and stuff like that. And we just brought in Michigan and Virginia, and Texas is on, and New Jersey's on. And it's just so many of them. Mm-hmm. It really is mind-boggling to think that this is where we're at in 2022. But the overall effort is to get to the 13th Amendment. So in order to do that, you have to have 3/4 of representatives on board in order to pass an amendment like that. So by working with each of the states, we're establishing that 3/4 in advance.
Yeah. Well, as I'm sure all of us are listening to all the political rhetoric going back and forth for these past several months, and the intensely negative ads and the mudslinging and all of the yelling and screaming that's been going on, it's issues like this that give me hope, right? Because this is not about negative campaigning or this is about, let's vote to make a purely positive change, right? Let's vote to end something that should have never happened in the first place.
Right.
But let's vote. And there's so many people who say, well, if I was alive back then, I would have stood for this and I would have stood up for that. Well, you know what? If you live in the states of Alabama, Louisiana, Oregon, Tennessee, or Vermont, you have an opportunity tomorrow to stand up and say, I want to see the way that enslavement has been codified in our nation's founding documents or in our state's documents, and I want to put an end to that. And I want to vote in a positive way to say we are going to end slavery in the states of Alabama, Louisiana, Oregon, Tennessee, and Vermont. And that is one of the great things about living in a democracy, right? Is we have a chance to let our voice be heard, to take a stand on this issue. We don't have to sling mud. We don't have to call names. We just have to say, hey, let's vote for this change that will only be good, that will only be positive, because anytime you end legal enslavement, that's a positive thing.
It opens up a door that has never been opened up before. We don't know what it looks like to be in a country that doesn't have legalized slavery. There hasn't been a day that passed that we haven't had it.
No.
So, we don't know what's going to come from this. And we're hesitant to even predict. We can assume certain things may occur, but we feel like just getting this done is worth the effort. And that opens a door that has never been opened before. And it is very much a bipartisan effort. It's not just people of color who are being incarcerated. You got over 1 million white people who are in these prisons, and like 5 or 6 million who are going through the jails every year. So it affects us all equally. And in many of these states, you've even had some of the more prominent Republican say that they are in full support of it, like in Tennessee, for instance, and also in Vermont. And so, it's something that is extremely important. Personally, for me, I think there's nothing more important in this country right now than ending slavery, because you can't have a country that has both freedom and slavery at the same time, because one is going to be a lie. And if one is a lie, it's going to be the freedom part. And if you look at the slavery part, then you're going to have to start paying attention to the literal crimes against humanity that are occurring. I'll give you just one example of how mind-blowing this is. In the top 5 populated African nations, we're talking about like Egypt and Nigeria and Ethiopia, if you combine them all together, they have nearly 600 million people. About 300 million of them are black men, boys, and babies. In the United States, we only have about 23 million black men, boys, and babies. And yet we have twice as many people in cages as they do. Twice as many black people in cages as they do. They've got 600 million people. We've only got 23 million black men, boys, and babies, and yet we have twice as many people in cages as they do. That's crazy to even consider it. And it's not because we're more criminal. It's because we've been criminalized. Ever since the introduction of the 13th Amendment and the exception clause and the move into convict leasing, they have used these laws like Jim Crow laws and black codes and on to criminalize our lives. And when they needed laborers, they didn't go to the unemployment office to get laborers. They called the sheriff, or they called the local constable and said, I need 10 laborers. And they would work those people to death. So we've morphed from that now. We don't just work you anymore. We treat you like meat on a shelf, where warehousing bodies has become one of the most lucrative things in the prison industry. Like Rikers Island in the pretrial detention center, to incarcerate a single person there costs $556,000 a year. Over $500,000 a year to incarcerate one single person for a year. That is not a cost. That's an incentive to incarcerate. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Because the more bodies you get and put on these shelves, the more money you're going to make. And many of these counties and cities and even states could not exist without their prison industries and the money that it generates.
Yeah,
Mark,
go ahead, Yusuf.
Right, I would just like to add, I'm sure some listeners may be saying, well, why haven't they gone to the courts to do something about this? Well, this has been argued in the courts for the earliest that I've seen, 1871, in a case called Ruffin versus Commonwealth. It's a Virginia case, and in that case, the court ruled that when a person becomes convicted of a crime, they become the slave of the state. And many courts and many large decisions, civil rights cases, Bailey versus Alabama, list goes on and on and on. And the court has never really wavered from that decision. So it's always been about the exploitation, not just of the labor, but just the principal possession of the person's body. And you have them, when they say to the person, when they're in that condition, they're civilly dead. So now we can see the exploitation of the Fourth Amendment when you talk about searches and seizures. Now they can seize a person's property because they now have their bodies, and we know civil forfeiture has been a huge thing that's been going on. So it's the exploitation of the Fourth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment against cruel and unusual punishments, and the excessive fines and fees. And then when we start touching on the 14th and 15th Amendment, the person becomes felony disenfranchised, nice little term there. But they actually become enslaved, and then they can no longer vote, with the exception of it's one state I think you can still vote when you're incarcerated. But and all the others, they can't vote. So we have about 2 million people in this country who can't even vote
6
just
million.
because of 6 million. I'm sorry, 6 million people who can't vote in the United States just because of those exception clauses.
Yeah. And this is why, right? There's so much talk today about we have to get better judges, we have to stack the court, we have to get all these things. And the reason why, I'll go back to my 2020 campaign, right? The reason I ran the campaign I ran, the reason I ran, period, was if right now, if you're a person of color or a woman or another marginalized person in this country, your best shot for justice lies solely on the whim of the judge, because our founding documents were not written to give you rights or to protect you. They were written to protect white landowning men. And so this is why, right? It's not just about we have to get better judges or we have to get, we need to change the founding documents that our laws are built on. And this is why what you're investing in and what you're doing to make these changes in the state constitutions and in the state legislators is so vitally important. Yeah, this isn't going to change something overnight. But what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to go to court and say, we can't do these things anymore. We can't, and you actually have a chance of winning based on the legality of it instead on whether or not you found a judge who was sympathetic to your cause, which is right now
Great
your best
point.
hope of getting justice in these areas.
Great
Is if you
point.
find a judge who's sympathetic to your cause, because all of this stuff is perfectly legal. Right? We're having a whole debate about affirmative action that's going before the Supreme Court right now. Well, you know what? Based on our Constitution, affirmative action is absolutely illegal. Right?
Right.
Of course, the Supreme Court, the conservative Supreme Court, is going to find it unconstitutional because it's not constitutional. The Constitution wasn't written to give equal access to education or other opportunities to people of color. It was written to protect white people. So anyway, I could go on this rant for a long time, but these are the things that I'm so grateful for the two of you and for the work you're doing. I'm going to share your website here. It's Abolition Today. You have a
.org,
podcast
yep.
that you do. You have newsletters you put out. You are working very hard to get these issues addressed. And I want to say thank you to you for your work. I always love the times we have to talk and to engage these things in a public space like this. And I'm excited to see what's going to be the outcome of these votes in these next few days as we hear back from these 5 states. And then I'm definitely looking forward to what's going to happen in the next wave, as there are even more states where this is going to get on the docket and try to get it passed there too. So, yeah, I'm excited.
I see in the chat room someone said that they would vote for you for president. So would I, and so have I. Both Yusuf and I and many others voted for you. In a time when it was Dumb or Dumber that was on the ballot, who would destroy the entire world, we chose Mark Charles, who was a slavery abolitionist, Native American, dual citizen, who understood what it was that we really wanted to get done. And if you should run again, we are preparing that stage for you right now, brother.
Absolutely.
Setting the platform up so that you would have this platform to stand on, because we do need another choice. I'm not interested in voting for Joe Biden, for instance, who is responsible for crimes against humanity. I'm certainly not interested in bringing in a Trump. So what's left to us? And, people say this is chess, not checkers, but they never consider the idea that they're moving pieces around who are sociopaths and genocidal maniacs. It's not just a queen or a king. These are nutcases who would literally destroy the world given the opportunity. And the pawns are often people like you and I, whose lives seem to be expendable. So we need a third option, and hopefully it'll be you. No pressure, though. I said I wouldn't put no pressure on.
Well, I thank you for that. One of the things I've been telling, I get asked that question a lot, and I've been telling people I will make a decision probably sometime in early 2023. I'm very closely watching what's going on. I've actually really enjoyed engaging in dialogue. I did a book tour over the summer, and I've been able to talk to audiences all around the country about these issues, because this is what is in my book on selling truths and the issues we talk about there. And so I've really enjoyed continuing to dialogue about these things and trying to get our nation to have this conversation at a much broader, even a more national level. And I think the thing that I really am trying to look at is what will be the best way to do that over the next 3 or 4 years? Will it be to do another campaign, or are there other ways that conversation can be engaged, depending on what happens both in these midterm elections as well as how the race in 2024 shapes out to look like? So yeah, I'm making no commitments right now, but I'm very much agree that these are issues we need to talk about as a nation, and we have to find a way to address them. And so I thank both of you for your work. Thank both of you for the efforts you're doing. I will watch along with you tomorrow to see what the outcome in these 5 states are. And then I will prepare to have more dialogue and more work to raise this issue in even more states in the future. So Yusuf, Max, thank you both very much. It's been a pleasure to
Thank
have
you
you
so
on
much.
today. And for those of you who have been following me, I just want to let you know I'm still promoting my book, which is On Selling Truth. And throughout Native American Heritage Month, which is the month of November, I'm offering a special on my website, which is if you order the book, I will ship it to you for free. Not the book for free. I will give you free shipping. You'll pay for the book, but I will give you free shipping on from my website. So if you are interested in learning about the doctrine of discovery, seeing how our foundations have had this horrific legacy of impact, especially on people of color throughout our nation's history, I encourage you to order the book Unsettling Truths, and through the end of November, you will get free shipping if you order a signed copy from my website. So, and please visit Abolition Today to talk about, to talk with Yusuf and Max and hear what they're doing as they're continuing to push their work forward. It's been great to have you both on here today. So, my brothers, I appreciate you.
Thank
I
you so
appreciate your
much,
work.
Mark.
And I look forward to continuing this conversation into the future.
Thank
Peace,
you, Mark.
Brother Mark. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to working with you on this as the years roll in.
Thank you. All my friends
Thanks.
on the stream watching this, thanks for joining today. We had a great conversation. If you didn't get to watch it or join us live, it will be on my YouTube channel, on my Facebook page, and I'll upload it to my Instagram as well. But my relatives, walk in beauty, and may we all learn how to walk in beauty together.
Peace.
Hakone.
I love it.